Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to give an overview to how the land use looks like here up north. I will talk about the mitigation potential we have in peat soils and the related barriers, drivers, and solutions. I will especially present some solutions that we try to implement here in Finland. So, first, some words about the mitigation potential. Some years ago, I went through all the national inventory reports of European countries and trying to look for any signs of mitigation actions on peat soils. And I didn't find any. So if you look at the graph here, we can estimate that there are many countries who could mitigate lots of emissions in small area, because in our peat-rich countries, it's typical that more than 20% of the agricultural total emissions come from peat soils, cultivated peat soils. And because I did this search for mitigation measures some years ago, I last week made it again for the Nordic countries, and again, still no sign of mitigation measures reported. And I would estimate that actually the potential to mitigate is underutilized at the moment. And I will talk about the options we have there. And first, Finland is probably an extreme case in European scale. 1/3 of our is covered by peat, so it's pretty much impossible to avoid peatland use. And we have really used it. If you look at the pie graphs there, it shows the change in peatland use from the 50s to the current times. And the undrained area has decreased a lot, mainly because of forestry drainage. We have some peat extraction, and we have agricultural use of peat soils, which has actually declined. And I will concentrate, of course, in the agricultural use in my presentation. So here's some figures on how the cultivated peat soils are used. We made a survey of a 10-year cultivation history, and we found that most of the 260,000 hectares is in different kinds of crop rotations. Then there are the extremes, about 60,000 hectares in pretty much permanent annual cultivation, and a similar amount in perennial cultivation. And then there are these around 13,000 in long-term extensive use. And well, coming to our government program, it has some very beautiful sentences on land use and climate change mitigation. First of all, Finland aims to be carbon neutral by 2035. Our climate law is currently being renewed. It may be possible that it will contain numeric targets for the LULUCF mitigation. And it also says, for example, that estimation climate impacts will be part of normal law preparation procedures in the future. And for LULUCF, it especially says that there is a climate program in the land use sector. It's ongoing. It mentions the target to reduce clearance of peat soils. Also, program for afforestation and rewetting. There is already one for afforestation, a new one, but nothing for rewetting yet. Carbon markets were mentioned, and even polludiculture was mentioned in the government program. But we know that there's a long way from the strategy papers to implementation. And well, if the peat soils could talk, they would ask, how can we help you? And in our case, in Finland, I try to illustrate the situation with these graphs. There's an example how we could be carbon neutral in 2035. So it means a massive reduction in emissions and also some enhancement of the carbon sink. And if we look at the other graphs, well, our carbon sink currently is around 15 million tons, and we have these emissions from peat soils around 18 million tons, which means that without those emissions, our sink could be double. So there should be some mitigation potential there. And also, we still burn peat, and it's possible to reduce another 6 million tons from peat burning. And currently, there actually are pretty good incentives for cutting down peat mining. The tax on energy use doubled this year, and it looks like the peat mining is going down faster than nobody could think of. So it seems that we have the incentives there, but still not for mitigation in forestry or agriculture when it comes to peat soils. And well, I sense some danger there in fast land use change regarding the peat mining areas, because now the change is so rapid that some areas with still deep peat layer might be available for other uses than peat mining, and there's no proper regulation for the land use changes there. And if we look at the graph there, I took the values from our inventory and the IPCC emission factors. If we look at those, what happens to carbon emissions when a land area is converted to other land use, we could estimate that if the area for peat production actually is available for agriculture, the emissions from land use actually there increase. So this is something that's something that could really happen, because of course the landowner sells it for agricultural land because the price is best there. So this is something we need to tackle here. Then some time ago, I made this kind of very coarse calculation how much area we would need to mitigate 10% of agricultural carbon dioxide emissions. And of course, we can do measures on peat soils and mineral soils, and we can, based on the IPCC emission factors, again, if we believe that they are true, we could estimate that only 1%, less than 1% of our current area could mitigate this 10%. And well, we can also say that the measures on peat soils, they are effective per hectare, but those on mineral soils, they are much more liked by the farmers, maybe easier to accept. But of course, none of these are mutually exclusive. These all are achievable. So I would say that at least this 1% of cultivated area would not pose a threat to agricultural profitability, for example. We could find that also in areas which are not that dependent on peat soils, because the regions are different in that sense. Here I summarize some of the barriers for effective mitigation. And I think the worst at the moment is that there are really no incentives to reduce the cultivated area. Also, we know that the current environmental payments have not been effective enough. Then the most common arguments by the decision makers against, for example, well, the most efficient mitigation measures that, well, we can't mitigate because you can't give us certain emission estimates, mitigation estimates. And there are always, if you re-wet, there are the high methane emissions and so on. So I think this is also a challenge that we should communicate, that we actually know what to do, and the emission estimates will get better. So the science takes time, but actually we know which are the most efficient mitigation measures, and they can be implemented even if the effects are not that certain. And then, of course, currently, at least here, we have no incentives for re-wetting. And for the rest of my talk, I will mainly concentrate it on how to target the mitigation measures better, and how to help the decision makers to start somewhere. And the decision makers, they don't want to make the farmers angry, and if we suggest something like re-wetting, they say that well, you can't take away our productive agricultural land, and it's so unfair, and so on. So we have tried to approach this so that to give some evidence for the decision makers that there are actually some areas, regions, some cases where to start without huge side effects. And that's why we have developed some criteria to find the area without huge socioeconomic effects, for example. So if you want to re-wet, you could concentrate on deep peat soils, because there you have more peat to save. That's one criteria you can use. Well, of course, then you can think regionally. If there are mineral soils available for replacement, you could try to start there. There are peat soils that have poor drainage, and there, if you re-wet those, the farmer will save the costs for re-drainage, for example. Well, then you can try to estimate the water availability. The easier it is to make the water remain on the re-wetted area, the cheaper the project likely is. And then you can, of course, think of concentrating re-wetting around. Okay, and for that purpose, we made this kind of very course principles, where we suggested that we can start from the cultivation history, we can detect the intensive and extensive sites, and suggest different mitigation actions for different kinds of peat soil groups. But we were not totally happy with this, because we used only the 1-year cultivation intensity data, and that's why we have now proposed a better one, which is in the next slide. Because now we took the 10-year cultivation history, because there are always these people, for example, well, in the ministry, who say that, well, you can't be sure, you need to have good data. And now we have tried to have better data for our proposal of the re-wettable parcels where they could start. And here we have different versions, but one version could be that you take the deepest peat soils, and then you could start from those which have had extensive cultivation for 8 out of 10 years. We can also use the data for the drainage status, and for the water availability. This is the most simple criteria. I think you take the slope less than 2% and no difference in elevation around the field. And as soon as you have this kind of maps, you could approach the farmers regionally, and you can actually find more rewettable fields because maybe the mapping is not perfect. And you can also approach farmer communities, make them work together, and avoid some conflicts with rewetting your neighbor's fields and so on. And you can also look for some areas that can concentrate on producing certain types of biomasses. And for example, here the orange area on the map, it's a region where mineral soils dominate. So it should not be a huge problem to leave those peat soils out of cultivation. So this kind of aspects we are trying to bring to the knowledge of the decision makers. And in the next slide, there is yes, an option. Of course, if you go to a catchment scale, you can use even more detailed criteria. You can use even hydrological mapping or something like that. And this is actually here, the figure is here because there's a very tempting area. You see, there are several parcels that have been long-term extensive. It's a very flat area, and I would think this kind of area could well be a start of a nice rewetting project, because it seems that the farmer has a problem there. Why have 10 years of extensive cultivation without food or feed production? So the persons who have the money for rewetting, they could go there and ask what kind of problems these farmers have with their fields, and rewetting could be a solution for those problems. So the next one. Yes, okay, of course, we don't know how well our mapping predicts the rewettable parcels, but we will know more in 3 years' time, because we are starting now. We started a project where we try to approach tens of farmers. We aim at rewetting at least 20 fields, and we try these different ways to implement the cooperation. And you can, for example, use this kind of mapping as a starting point, and then you can contact the regional authorities and to find some active drainage communities, land consolidation processes, or some farmer groups run by the Extension Service. Then we plan to contact the farmers, have webinars, workshops, and then farm visits. And on those farm visits, we plan together with the farmer the best way to mitigate greenhouse gases by their peat parcels. And we select the parcels for rewetting, and we in the project offer the planning and equipment for blocking the ditches. And we will monitor the yield and groundwater table in all of those rewetted fields, greenhouse gases, water quality on some sites, and economy likely on all sites. And also in the end, we ask the farmers' experiences on this. This will be very exciting, I think. And I proudly present the logo in the upper corner, because that's our brand new logo for Paludiculture in Finnish. And the next slide, please. So here's just an example what kind of cooperation could be a starting point. We now know that peat production goes down, and we need the materials to replace growing media and bedding materials. And this already runs in one place in Finland, this kind of cooperation where the farmer has rewetted a field for reed canary grass production. Then there's a contractor who has harvested reed from watercourses, and if the field gets too wet, this contractor can also go to the polyculture field. And now this farm and the company producing the growing media have a deal that the company does not have to transport the material to their premises, but they can produce this growing media on the farm. And now the company just goes there to pack the product, and we expect that this will improve the profitability of the production. And this is now being experimented, and we hope that this kind of model could actually be replicated in other places. And the next one, please. So as a conclusion, I have talked a lot about targeting and finding the low-hanging fruit, but it's of course clear that we will not fill the LULUCF requirements if we don't do lots more than for example, rewetting the most rewettable parcels. And we should find a way somehow to make the landowners proud on the mitigation potential they have on their peat fields. And the funding by society is not anymore the only solution. We have to look for the private fundings, and the markets are also developing fast for the renewable materials. And but I think we still have lots of research for targeting the right kind of rewetting for different cases to avoid the side effects that that many people are worried about, and they are a real danger here. And I still have one slide. I was asked to talk about the current and future perspectives, but I couldn't resist adding some history perspective, because I found these hilarious old newspaper references where there are pages and pages of lists of landowners who have been rewarded for peatland drainage. And the reward has been either a silver spoon or a silver goblet. And of course, they were heroes. I mean, they saved lives. Famine was a threat then. Now, famine is not the threat here, but climate change is. And now I think we just have to reverse this reward system. Now the descendants of the same landowners can be paid for rewetting. And actually, people often say that it's not fair to take the land from the farmers, but I think this is fair, because actually the same field parcel can be rewarded twice, and the same family can be rewarded twice, first for drainage and then for rewetting. That's fair, I think. And as a last point, I think we need this kind of forefront farmers, for example, the one here whose interview is in the YouTube, who gives the face for rewetting, and makes also the other farmers kind of gives the examples for the other farmers that this is possible. So I will stop here, and the next slide I still have some thanks to the funders, and I also want to thank my co-workers here in Luke, my wonderful and idea-rich co-workers who have promoted rewetting with me here. And thanks for your attention.